Jadon Sancho is undoubtedly gifted, but at this point in his career, there's a very real worry that he might not fulfill his potential. After bursting onto the scene at Borussia Dortmund, Sancho returned to England with Manchester United in 2021. But it's safe to say it hasn't really gone to plan so far. So what's happened to the kid from South London who at one point was being touted as English football's saviour? Stay with us to find out. Let's take a quick look back at those early years first of all. After starting off with Watford and actually living in their accommodations as a youngster, Sancho was lured to Manchester City in March 2015 as their focus switched to bringing their own talent through the ranks. Initially signed for £66,000, potentially rising to $500,000 with add-ons, it was thought Sancho was about to make an assault on the City first team in the 2017-18 season. But having been left out of their pre-season tour, the youngster began making noises of wanting to leave. He then missed training once the team had returned from pre-season, and the writing was on the wall for his career at City, which never even got off the ground. He was sold to Bundesliga giants Borussia Dortmund, with his time in Germany universally accepted to have been a resounding success. With 50 goals in 137 appearances in all competitions, with the vast majority coming off the wing, Sancho was beginning to attract admiring glances from the Premier League, and if some accounts are to be believed, from Italy and Spain too. Having won the DFL Super Cup in 2019 and the DFB Pokal a couple of years later, Sancho had backed up his fine form with a couple of trophies. However, in 2022 he decided that he wanted to head back home as Manchester United moved in a huge deal thought to be worth around £80 million. But Sancho has been a shell of his former self at United, prompting some people to suggest he cannot do it in England. So, what's happened to him? Could the problem lie with his employers? Manchester United and their fans live in a pretty strange world. Having not won the Premier League in a decade and not even challenged in Europe for even longer, they are of the delusional opinion that they are the biggest club in the world. These claims obviously haven't helped Sancho, and the weight on his young shoulders because of these unrealistic expectations is huge. United need a reality check, and the sooner they get one, the sooner they can reassess and formulate a plan to attempt to get back to where they once were. Burying their collective heads in the sand and just expecting City, Liverpool, Arsenal and Newcastle to fall away simply isn't going to happen. Sancho is clearly talented, but he has been thrust into a faltering team as a huge signing, which has simply failed so far. At 23, it seems as though he's been around for a long time, but he's still a relative youngster. United could possibly have taken a different approach with him and slowly integrated him into the first team setup, but of course they decided not to and just threw him straight in. If players brought in for big money don't perform instantaneously, there's a tendency for fans of any club, and especially for fans of Manchester United, who are still living in the past, to jump on that player, which has done nothing for the player's confidence in this instant. Next up, we're discussing the mental side of things. These days, there's been a marked shift towards mental health, which is obviously a great thing. Premier League players are given access to the best mental health professionals money can buy to make sure they're in tip-top shape when Saturday comes. It is as clear as day that Jadon Sancho isn't in a great place mentally, and his struggles obviously aren't just physical. We've all heard commenters say he's a confidence player when discussing various players, and in some ways, every player is a confidence player of sorts. Jadon Sancho definitely falls into this category. Yes, he came in for big money and was expected to shine, especially considering how he played a part in England's run to the final in Euro 2021. However, as things quickly turned sour at Old Trafford, Sancho's confidence dissipated just as quickly. You can clearly see when he fancied it and when he doesn't. When he's up for it, he's direct and gives his fullback a run for his money. When he doesn't, well, it's quite the opposite. If Sancho's first trick doesn't work, or if he fails to beat a man early on, he appears to shrink into himself. This was quite the opposite at Dortmund, as he was encouraged to carry on with his penetrating runs until one came off. At United, should he start off slow and miscontrol a pass, for example, then the audible groans around Old Trafford are loud and clear. United fans would do well to take this on board and maybe realise that Jadon Sancho is still a very young player. What about the Ten Hag effect? Of course, there is no one particular person to blame for Jadon Sancho's poor performance since he arrived in Manchester, except maybe the player himself. If he cannot motivate himself to put a shift in, considering the obscene amount of money he's being paid, then there is something seriously wrong. However, since Ten Hag has come in, it's clear United's Dutch manager isn't 100% sold on the former City youth team player. Admittedly, his appearance figures aren't too dissimilar to his first season at Old Trafford, playing 26 times in the league last season and scoring 2 more goals overall than he did the previous season. But what might have thrown Sancho off at the start of last season may have been Ten Hag's acquisition of his former player, the Brazilian Antony. As we all know, the former Ajax winger has also flattered to deceive, despite a bright start which saw him back early on in the season against Arsenal. But it's no exaggeration to say it's been a case of fits and starts for him. Psychologically though, that situation cannot have been easy for Sancho. When a new manager comes in, everybody's under the microscope in one way or another. But when the new boss's first course of action is to bring in one of his old players who plays in the exact same position as you, then this is bound to have an effect. Again though, this might say more about Sancho than it does Ten Hag. If he cannot stomach a little bit of competition, especially after failing to light the place up the season before, then maybe he simply doesn't have the minerals to perform at the very highest level. What do you guys think? Next up, could it be the system? I mean, it's certainly a possibility. Sancho flourished in Germany as he was encouraged to play free-flowing attacking football. The system also fit him perfectly and allowed him to get forward as often as possible. This was highlighted by him scoring 50 goals in all competitions for the men in black and yellow. At United, Sancho, and all wingers for that matter, are expected to track back and put a shift in defensively, something he wasn't always on the hook for in Germany. I mean, there are of course games in which he would be expected to do a job covering the right back, going away to Bayern for example, but in general, Sancho's defensive responsibilities were much lighter in the Bundesliga. As we know, the Premier League is also much more competitive than the Bundesliga, which was proven again recently as the Munich club won the league for what seems like the 100th season in a row. There is such a huge gulf between the top and bottom teams in the Bundesliga, which gives attacking players for the big teams a certain edge. This doesn't happen to the same extent in England. In Premier League football, the gap is smaller, and you don't get a second on the ball before someone is there to close you down. It might simply be that this is going to take a little more getting used to for Sancho. I mean, better players than him have struggled earlier on in their Premier League careers, so he's not a complete write-off just yet. It could simply be that the transition from Bundesliga to Premier League is taking a little longer for Sancho. So what does the future hold? Once touted as the hottest property in European football, Sancho's stock has fallen considerably. But as we mentioned, he's still only 23 years old. Time is on his side. Next season is massive for Jadon Sancho, and the 2023-2024 will represent something of a crossroads in his career. If he produces another season like the previous two, then suggestions that he isn't cut out for the Premier League will grow even louder. Not many players are afforded 3 distinctly average seasons without being shown the door, especially players who cost what Sancho did. Should he put in the performance of a player who possesses the ability he does, then he could be a real weapon for Manchester United going forward. Last season proved there is still a long way to go for United, and their dreams of once again challenging for the big honours, but getting Jadon Sancho back to something like the form he showed the world whilst at Dortmund would go at least some way to achieving those goals. Whilst it is unfair for United and their fans to lay the weight of expectation squarely at the door of Jadon Sancho, they're absolutely allowed to expect a little bit more output from the man who is being talked about as a definite starter for England for the next decade. Part of this can also probably be attributed to the media, who love nothing better than to build a young English player up and then castigate him when he hits a rough patch. Jadon Sancho is a player we all know has the goods in his locker though, so maybe some of those criticisms have been justified. What do you guys think? Do you see Sancho bouncing back? As usual, thanks for dropping in on us today, and remember to tune in next time when we will be discussing loads more cool bits and pieces. Why not do us a solid by liking and sharing today's video, as well as subscribing to our channel. Bye guys!